Hello, beautiful people. My name is Kristen. Today I have a review of only one book, and that is A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Parry. And this is the first in a duology. So I realized I don't read a lot of duologies, and I don't do a lot of singular book reviews, but this book is worthy. So let me tell you a little bit about it to see if maybe it's something you would like to check out. Because even though I say this is absolutely a 5-star, this will definitely be in my top 10 books that I read for the entire year, I do think that this is not the book for everybody. There is quite a few people that I've seen that were quite disappointed with it, and I can share those reasons too so that you can figure it out. But to me, I am probably a good target audience for this book. It is a story that is a historical, magical fiction book. So it takes actual lots and lots of historically researched events that are taking place in the 1800s around France and England's politics and the settlement of colonies, particularly dealing with the slave trade and what is now the Dominican Republic / Haiti. And so there's a lot of dialogue. If you are a fan of Agatha Christie and that kind of more like where Hercules Poirot is thinking about the murder situation and people come into the room and say, oh, this just happened. And so then there's this discussion or thought process that goes along with it. And as opposed to being on the scenes of the actual action, then this is that kind of style of book, right? It even talks about the philosophers, the actual philosophers. It is dealing with human rights. And the interesting thing about it is that the magic system that is in it, so it's our world, our history, but the magic system is complex. So you are also trying to figure out exactly how it works and who has what powers, because when you are born, you may or may not have magical powers, and you may or may not have all forms of magic or expressions of that magic. So everybody's kind of tested when they're born. Do they have these powers? And if they do, they actually bracelet them so that they can be controlled, because there are laws and regulations against using magic, particularly dark magic, which is associated with more like vampires. Like if you need human blood in order to make your magic happen, then that is dark magic. Or obviously things that are controlling and taking away people's natural rights would be considered dark magic. So there's common regular magic, there's dark magic, and then there's these also hierarchy of where you're born in society. Are you a common person, or are you royalty and have some pull? Because there's different rules for that. So there's this philosophical debate of when can you use powers, and basically they're saying the answer is really only in self-defense. And so they want to limit the magic powers, and yet they are used in ways to, for instance, control the slaves. So right off the bat, we see that they are giving, alchemy concoctions and using magic controllers to control the slaves, right, to take away their rights. And so a lot of the plot and the dialogue that goes along is talking about these situations. Okay, so you have, for instance, Pitt and Wilberforce in England who really existed, but they're saying that Pitt we discover pretty early on, because it reads very much like Hamlet, right? The beginning of Hamlet, where they're waiting for the ghost. So they are out looking for this spirit that is maybe trying to communicate with them. And we discover that Pitt actually has some magic powers of necromancy, and he can actually draw or communicate with some of these dead, right? And then meanwhile, over in France, Robespierre and Camille, who are going along trying to govern France, and Robespierre was known throughout history as being well spoken and really drawing people to him, even though he didn't necessarily, you know, was born with the perfect lineage, but he drew people into him as a leader. So he is a Mesmer, right? He like has an actual magic power that kind of draws people to him. And so the third kind of storyline actually follows through the eyes of a young girl, Finn, who is a black slave girl. And so she is shipped overseas, away to the islands to work on a plantation. And then she comes in contact with Toussaint, who is the main revolutionary leader over there. And there's magical voices, and she discovers she has some magic powers. And so we're trying to figure out like who has what powers, you know, where do they fit in this lineage? And then a lot of discussion behind the scenes, a lot of political aspects going down of what does this mean for France, for England, for the colonies, for the plantation owners. How do we try, and most everybody in it is an abolitionist. They are at the heart trying to stop the horrors that are going on with the slave trade, and yet there's big money and there's big politics, and how do you navigate that, and how does that tie in with the magic system, because they're using the magic to control the slaves, to actually chemically give them concoctions and magically give them directions to control them. And so do you regulate the magic? Do you regulate the slave? How do you get through the politic jungle, if you will, through this and come out? And so almost, I think it's like about a 550 page book, and the majority of it is actually dialogue and philosophy and discussions, way more so than action. You have these little action scenes that play out that are really intense and break it up, but for the most part, you have to be the kind of reader that really delves into the philosophical, character-driven narrative, and then you get a new piece of information, and you're like, oh, that connects in, or that makes sense, or aha, that's what's going on with that. And, you know, sometimes the characters themselves are discovering it. And I just found it exceedingly interesting, exceedingly engaging. I know a couple people talked about how they didn't like the actual history muddled with this magic, like it somehow minimized some of the leaders or some of the actions, or took away from some of the extremeness of what was going on in history. But I think for me that the magical element just enhanced it even more, as drawing me into it, making me ponder it, and then not lose sight of the fact that these are real people that really had to deal with this stuff. And, you know, what does that mean? What is the implications of all these things? And should there be, you know, a line drawn between if you are common born and if you're royalty born, as far as even something like self-defense, right? And so how are people dealt with differently within the system when you are caught with things? And I just think that, in, you know, those are the kind of things that I think you should consider picking this book up if you would be up for that kind of journey, that kind of head game, figure it out, problem solve it, use the little gray matter, and you learn some about history. Every once in a while I would stop and go, oh, I don't know anything about the slave trade specifically going on in the Dominican Republic. And so I actually, you know, looked it up and looked up, you know, the real people and what was actually going on. And I was honestly a little impressed, just in the sense of how this story plays out and how it's told. So I absolutely adore this book. Think it is 5-star. I was very attached to the characters, just thought that the dialogue was so interesting. And at the times that I would start to kind of go, this is going on a little long, or, you know, getting a little too drawn out, something else would come in and I'd be like, oh, So this is my review with spoiler-free Declaration, the Rights of Magicians. I hope that maybe if it's something you would like to check out, you could research into it further, and hope that you are having a great reading day, whatever you're reading. Y'all have a great one. Take care. Like and subscribe. See you later.